Hi everyone, and welcome back to the George Collection. I'm Rachel with Right Side Blonde. Today, in the spirit of July and Independence Day, I'm going to carry on with our patriotic theme and do the July 1997 issue with Jenny McCarthy on the front. Gotta love her patriotic tongue sticking out. I'm sure she could think of a million other things she would have rather been doing than getting her tongue painted for the cover of George magazine, but hey, it made for a pretty cool cover of George. To begin today's episode, I'll start with the editor's letter written by John Kennedy. It starts with, "On other days of the year, we may be party men indulging in controversies, but today we are Americans all, and nothing but Americans." Daniel Webster. Overripe and eager, the painted lady of Independence Day comes round again. As the perfect marriage of American history and honky-tonk, it's the ideal holiday for us here at George. In this July issue, we look past the earnest inertia afflicting the swamp that is midsummer Washington and show you all the summer fun America can offer. And lest we forget the anniversary of our national unfettering, it's mostly free, free, free. The weird thing is July 4th wasn't always such a holiday, but rather an occasion for the competing parties, then Federalists and Republicans, to indulge in a day of spirited chest-thumping and name-calling. Republicans celebrated the Declaration of Independence and cheered Thomas Jefferson. Federalists glorified the Constitution, hailed George Washington, and vilified Jefferson. In a famous toast of 1798, a Federalist bellowed, "John Adams, may he, like Samson, slay thousands of Frenchmen with the jawbone of Jefferson." It wasn't until the eerie deaths of Adams and Jefferson, exactly 50 years to the day after they had adopted the Declaration, that the spirit of celebration changed. The two former presidents and arch rivals had softened differences in their dotage, presaging a larger national reconciliation. Adams' rueful last words, "Jefferson still lives," weren't quite right. Jefferson had died just hours earlier in Monticello. President John Quincy Adams tripped over himself days later, declaring the visible and palpable sign of divine favor to the nation evidenced by the portentous passings. He hosted a Washington ceremony that included a reading of the Declaration and an appeal for funds to help pay the debts of Jefferson's estate. Can you imagine a modern equivalent? Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich joining hands in a national telethon to help pay their legal bills? No. From that day on, the 4th of July became a national celebration, and we're richer for it. There's lots of other good stuff between these covers, but given the occasion, it seems more fitting to hawk the past than the present. You'll just have to sit back and read all the fireworks yourself. John Kennedy. Next, I'd like to read the article by Tony Blankley. I've grown quite fond of Tony Blankley's articles. He was a constitutionalist, he was a classic Republican, and he was very cautious with how he viewed bipartisanship. And looking back in the 1997 era when he was writing these articles and looking at what has happened into 2022, I can see why, and I wish we would have heeded his warnings a little more clearly. Mr. Blankley passed away January 7th of 2012, but his words live on in George magazine. Here we go. The political class in Washington is slouching about town, complaining of a shortage of interesting political news. Network bureau chiefs are fretting that they aren't getting their fair share on the evening news shows. Columnists are scratching around like cattle on a dusty range, looking for something useful to gurgitate. Members of Congress are discovering heretofore unnoticed charms in their districts. Political consultants are sleeping with their own wives. It's all rather disconcerting. It's one thing for the nation to lose interest in politics. It is surpassingly odd that we in Washington are losing interest. I am inclined to blame, in part, the former Soviet Union. In the good old days, snarling Soviet dictators threatening to rain down 30,000 nuclear bombs on the United States gave meaning to our lives. Back then, the comings and goings at the White House could signify war or peace, life or death. Today, the only drama at the White House involves whether the president is able to sneak in pizzas or other delectables without the old ball and chain noticing. Pizzas. Yet even that melodrama is losing its piquancy. The nation long ago figured out that its president is a little slutty. We had an election, and what can I say? They threw the rascal in. The United States seems to be more concerned with the muscle tone of its citizens' buttocks than with the moral tone of its president. Our national motto has become buns of steel, brains of jelly. If Soviet communism's precipitous fall is part of the problem, President Clinton's peculiar domestic politics are the other. Clinton is like a massive morphing marshmallow. He embraces, absorbs, and replicates all politically popular opposing views. But unlike a first-rate president such as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who borrowed and applied popular opposition ideas, Clinton absorbs the ideas and proceeds to ignore them, leaving only a treacly, rhetorical residue. When Clinton appropriated the Republican idea of shrinking the federal government, he sent out his vice president to hold an unending series of photo op announcements of the tumbling number of federal employees. But Clinton's actual policy was merely to shrink Defense Department employment faster than he expanded employment in civilian agencies. As a result, the president defeated, without publicly opposing, the GOP goal of reducing the number of irritating, unproductive bureaucrats at such departments as Housing and Urban Development, Health and Human Services, Labor and Energy. Clinton understood that publicly arguing the details of where the cuts came from was, for Republicans, a futile exercise. The American public doesn't do details. Germans do details. We are big picture people, and the big picture was that Clinton was shrinking the government. The historically Republican policy of tax cuts was similarly marshmallowed. Between 1993 and 1995, we had a pretty honest fight over taxes. Republicans wanted to cut them. Clinton raised them. The public followed the fight with justifiable interest, but by late December 1995, Clinton applied his marshmallow theory of politics. He came out for several tax cuts. He was for education tax cuts, family tax cuts, and job-creating tax cuts. Those proposals didn't add up to much. About a third of the House Republicans proposed tax cuts. But once again, Republicans had nothing to fight about with Clinton except the details. And in a country where 1 out of 4 registered voters, for example, did not know that Al Gore was running for vice president last year, not enough people would hear about the details to make any difference in an election. The marshmallow effect was rendered in its most sublime form by Clinton's defanging of the 30-year national fight over welfare. A lesser charlatan than Clinton would have been flummoxed on this one. In 1996, polls showed that 2/3 of Americans supported the Republican welfare bill. Passed by the House and the Senate, the bill was on his desk. He couldn't rewrite it. He couldn't argue over the details. For once, the Republicans had America's detail phobia on their side. So Clinton signed it into law, and while signing it, stated his intention to improve it in 1997. He didn't use the more accurate terms, disembowel, eviscerate, or castrate. Americans like our products improved, and never mind the details. Which brings us back to the jejune politics of Washington in 1997. Sure enough, this year, many disemboweled, eviscerated, and castrated Republicans are joining the great white marshmallow in improving the welfare bill. Republicans have caught the public's detail phobia. The notion that politics is about the struggle over ideas has been temporarily abated in Washington because the public indifference to details has opened the door to Clinton's marshmallow strategy. Democracy requires an informed electorate. Unfortunately, we don't have one. After reading that article, one word comes to mind, and that word is rhino. And I don't mean the animal. Before I finish up this episode, I wanted to show you the very back of this magazine. Normally there's an advertisement on the back, and there is one here, but it's none other than Marilyn Monroe with a red background. Last week we talked about red meaning code and JFK, so very cool that it's red. It's kind of a cool ad. It's a Mercedes-Benz ad, but the only Mercedes-Benz logo is right here on her face, very, very small. So kind of cool. I thought it was worth sharing. I hope you all enjoyed this episode of the George Collection. Have a great week, and I will see you next time.
Magazine, George, which is a hoot of a magazine. I thought you were a lawyer.
I was.
What happened?
Well, we decided, actually taking a cue from folks like yourself and you around the 1992 election, that there was an opportunity here to change the definition of a political magazine. Certainly the way Americans were accessing information about politics and politicians was changing. Candidates were appearing on late night talk shows, on talk radio, on sitcoms, and there was a kind of a leveling process, and while the rest of media clearly had caught up with that, we felt that political magazines per se hadn't.
Your mother was a hell of an editor at Doubleday.
That's what I hear.
Would she have liked George?
I think she would have.